What's going on, everyone? Hope you're well. Baddest Chaplain here once again. Hoping you're enjoying yourself, enjoying the day. Today we have a wonderful guest. I'm talking to my brother Joseph Ulloa, law student at the University of Texas at Dallas College of Law. Joseph is also a social justice fellow with the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Foundation. Joseph, so good to see you, man. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me, Chris. I appreciate it.
Oh, no worries for sure, man. So take us back to the foundation. I want to hear about your journey toward law school. You're a 3L now. As you're about to enter this final year of law school, talk to us a bit about what inspired you to do this sort of work. Like, why did you want to go to law school?
So out of college, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I had gotten a business degree, and I had, did some legal studies and also some cultural studies. And so I got recruited from Teach for America, which is a program where they send you somewhere across the country for 2 years to go teach in underserved communities. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I originally got an offer for going to New York, but last minute I was like, man, I don't know if I could go to New York because I was born and raised in Texas.
Got you.
And so I had asked the organization, is there a spot potentially for me here in Texas, like somewhere, anywhere in the state? And they put me in the Valley, which was right there on the border town of Mexico and Texas.
Yeah.
And so, I was a teacher there. Things didn't work out as far as finishing my 2 years, but I gained a lot of experience from my time in Teach for America. And I would have students coming in from Mexico.
Right.
A good, maybe like at least 40% of them would cross the border every single day.
Wow.
And that just kind of inspired me to pursue a legal education. I was like, man, like you can do a lot in the classroom, right?
For
When
sure.
you have 30 kids, when you have 20 kids or 25 kids per class, but also like 100 and I think I had 120 kids total.
Right.
So I saw 120 kids every single day.
Right.
But I felt like there was another way, and I felt that other way was going to be law school. And trying to acquire a legal education and become a lawyer.
Yeah.
So that's how I got here. So
yeah, and I'm thinking about you being on that journey, serving at the school that you served, having those experiences. And then I'm always thinking about it this way, Joseph, like, you could have been born, 10 years earlier or 10 years later, but you're doing this sort of work, asking these sorts of questions in this time in American history. So talk to us about being in this time and how it grabbed your attention towards social justice. Like, you could have just taught those 2 years and be like, man, I'm never doing this. Like, why are you so attached to social justice?
I'd probably say I'm attached to social justice because I consider myself privileged. And what I mean by that is that, like, man, I've seen kids all the way to like teenagers, all the way to young adults, even up to my age and maybe even older, be in like really difficult positions where, whether they're being evicted, whether they're being arrested for something, whether, they're just going through extreme poverty, and I feel like I never really had those issues. And that could have easily been my story, from the get.
Right.
So I feel like with my opportunities and my, I guess, privilege, I want to be able to contribute back to my community in that type of manner.
I hear that. I definitely hear that. So when we have these sorts of conversations, sometimes it feels like the social justice conversation can exist in an echo chamber, right? It's easy to sort of like preach to the choir in that way. But for people who are listening or watching and they're just sort of like on the fence about all of this, how do we teach people to stay focused on justice and not just view it as some trend that we just visit from time to time when it's in the headlines, you know?
Man, that's a good question. Um, I mean, I think it has to be it has to be instilled in your purpose, you know?
Right.
And what I mean by that is like you have to live every day like thinking about the other person. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Right.
Like, when I'm on the bus, and because sometimes, I'll take the bus
No
just to,
doubt.
reflect. I see like this man, sitting right next to me, and I'm like, man, like, you could tell he doesn't have a lot, but he's happy and he's kind of
Right.
content in life.
Right.
And I'm just like, man, like, if only he lived a different life,
Come
and
on.
in a way, I'm just thinking, I'm like, what if I can contribute, my life in some type of way to help someone in his position or someone surrounding his positions,
Right. Right.
and so I always reflect on that. I'm like, and I think I'm like, what am I doing today that I can actually help others, especially those who are underserved or in need. And I'm like, well, I'm in law school.
Hmm.
I moved away from family. I'm pursuing a legal education, and I hope, I still, live that on a daily basis, because I mean, you are who you are, today, but a year from now you could be somebody else,
Right.
and that might change. But I tell myself every single day, I'm going to get this education to be able to help others who are less fortunate.
Hmm.
And I don't want to be put in that position where I'm just like thinking about um only myself,
Come on. Right.
so I guess like always thinking about other people in your daily life can really remind you of, what your purpose is in being able to help other people.
Certainly. Certainly.
And
Certainly.
I really do believe that that's important, because like you just start to lose sight of that. For example, I mean, I've had a couple of thoughts about like, man, like, the big firm life, I
Hmm.
can make, the big bucks, like 100K, 150K a year,
For
which is
sure.
great.
Right.
I'm not gonna like I'm not going to diss people who, want that life for themselves.
Right. Right.
But at the same time, like, how are you going to contribute to other people who are less fortunate than you? You know what I'm saying?
Definitely. Definitely.
So just that constant reminder, I'd probably say that constant reminder on a daily basis, and just never losing a hold of that, that purpose.
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. Because I can see it really being something where, you know, I'll never forget this, man. Like I remember looking at the NAACP's website. This is, gosh, almost 15 years ago, or maybe closer to 20. And they had this phrase that more leaders, paraphrasing, more leaders have been removed from the movement by a comfortable lifestyle than like an assassin's bullet. Right. So we think about it like, oh, it has to be something like real dramatic, people applauding on you. But no, it really can just be the lull of like, I'm good. And it stops right there. And there's something really powerful about having an understanding of like, even though I'm comfortable, I still have a responsibility to those who don't enjoy the comforts I get to enjoy and get to, take for granted that sort of privilege you spoke about earlier. We have a responsibility to folks who don't have those privileges.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah, and it's interesting because and this is kind of relevant, but not relevant. I was speaking to a buddy of mine. He's at the district attorney's office,
Uh-huh.
the local district attorney's office. And for those who are listening, I mean, when you're a district attorney, you're basically the one who's like prosecuting like all these crime cases.
Right, right, right.
And we're talking about how, well, he was talking about how hungry he is. He says he wants to be the best, trial attorney in the nation.
Come on.
And he during lunch he watches trials when he's also like working on cases and watching body cam footages, and also just trying to prosecute crimes and so on and
Right.
so forth. And mind you, he's a minority as well.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I mean, me and him don't see eye to eye when it comes to prosecuting cases and then also defending cases. But he didn't come from a lot,
Right.
and it was interesting. It was interesting seeing how he is wanting to become something, especially coming from the background that he's from.
Mhm.
But at the same time, he is on the side of the table where he is putting people in jail,
Right, right.
and it 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 sits with me. It doesn't sit with me well. I
Got
mean,
you.
because I don't believe in prosecution as much as I do with defense. Right now I'm actually working for a criminal defense firm.
Got you.
Um, so when I see him be hungry for that, it's good, but it's also kind of nerve wracking.
Get you. Get you.
You
It
know,
concerns you.
yeah, it concerns me because
Yeah.
you're hungry, you want to be the best trial attorney, but at the same time, like, bro, you're putting people in jail.
Right.
And I mean, in some cases, it's justified.
Sure,
It
sure,
is
sure.
justified. I'm not going to say that there should be no laws to be able to hold people accountable, but there are a lot of laws that are discriminatory when it comes to minorities.
No question. No question.
Yeah,
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 it's even insane that it's wild to think that there's folks who would want to like argue that still. You know what I mean? As much as it's been documented, you can read something like the New Jim Crow, you can read The Color of Law. Like there's so many great texts that point us toward what you're saying as just being a fact, but we still have this sort of like divided or what I would even more so like flagrantly call this clinging to an American mythology about the way things are rather than the way that we would desire them to be rather than how they actually are. And I think there's still people who would prefer a sort of colorblind approach to carrying out the law rather than one that really is contextualized and understands the ways in which
right,
these laws still affect minority populations disproportionately. You know,
right.
absolutely. So thinking about the way that these decisions affect everyday people because hearing that colleague of yours watch trials in a way that almost sounds like an athlete watching tape, right? It's
Yeah,
easy for folks to kind of get just sort of like lost in the sauce, especially when Supreme Court decisions come out and then like people know like, oh, this is a big deal, but like what does it actually mean? Like when you hear about like a justice's opinion come out and all these different things, people seem to get either confused or overwhelmed. So for any of our listeners who are in that position, help them understand what's going on right now, particularly with the impact of the Supreme Court's decision on affirmative action. Like break it down for folks who are just kind of like, what is going on?
So the recent decision that came out this past summer, I believe it was in June.
Hmm.
The court case, the name of it is called. Oh, also, I should probably put a disclaimer out there. Anything that I say is not legal advice.
Now, legal advice, y'all. He's
I
still in
am not.
school. He's still in school.
I am not an attorney. So please do not rely on any statement that I am, relaying in this podcast.
100%.
Um, so as far as the Supreme Court case that came out back in June, um, this was the students for fair admissions versus the president and fellows of Harvard College. So this was an equal protections case where we were considering race-based admissions,
Hmm.
and anything that pertains to race, or almost anything that pertains to race, is under the Equal Protections Clause for the 14th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment basically talks about how the Bill of Rights, all of the states, all of the 50 states have to follow the Bill of Rights. And when it pertains to race, you cannot discriminate someone based off of the race. Um, and in this case, they basically overturned a previous case from 2003. And I believe the name of that one was Grutter versus Bollinger.
Hmm.
Um, so in Grutter versus Bollinger, they basically said, and I think it was Justice Powell who basically said, you know, when it comes to the student body of a university of higher education, there is a compelling interest to justify the use of race in the university's admissions. So basically, what that says is like whether a state has a compelling purpose to use race in their state admissions. So when it comes to federal law, and also I guess the Supreme Court, to word it better,
Hmm.
um, when you're considering a state law, you see if it's like discriminatory pertaining to race.
Hmm.
And back then in Grutter, it wasn't. They were considering, well, is this going to be a purpose that we can utilize for the good of, I guess, admissions for universities?
Hmm.
And so they said that that was a good thing. You know, it would create more diversity for the student population. But then now, 20 years later, we're reversing the decision, saying that this doesn't pertain to us anymore,
Right.
and the racial preferences are just kind of like non-existent, so to say.
Hmm.
They don't say that explicitly. I mean,
Right.
but it's it's basically, it's basically not considered in admissions for a factor of race, and that's kind of concerning because I believe that when you're applying for college, your race um, does have an impact on whether you're going to gain admissions to an Ivy League school.
Right.
Um, and if you're not able to gain admissions to that school, then what are you left with? And especially coming from a Black or a Latino background,
Come on.
and I think in Justice Jackson, she kind of like comes up in her opinion talking about like John and James. John, he comes from 7 generations of degrees,
Right.
right? And then James, and then also John is white, right? He comes
Hmm.
from 7 generations
Degrees.
of degrees. And then James, he's Black, and he's the first one in his family to be going to college. Um, and she kind of goes through those comparisons. And obviously that's not the case for everyone, right?
Right.
But that's something to consider when it comes to admissions, because I mean, I don't know about you, Chris, but I'm the first person to go to college for my family.
Got you. Right.
Um, but I think throughout time, it's just scary, especially for my children. There's only
Hmm.
5% black lawyers in the country.
Right.
If you really think about putting all of the lawyers in one room, right? All of the lawyers in the U.S. in one room,
Right.
only 5% of them are Black.
Yeah.
And then if you're to think about the Latinos, there's only like 4 to 5% that are Latinos.
Come
You
on.
know, and why we question, like, why is that? You know, and I mean, if we're trying to increase the population, at least for lawyers
Hmm.
pertaining to like Latinos and also Blacks, why are we taking away the affirmative action?
Right. Right. No, I mean, it's really when you put it that way, like thinking about like a room full of 100 lawyers, and 5 of them would be Black, 5 of them
Yeah.
would be Latino. That's sobering, Joseph. Like that's
Yeah,
really
and I should also probably say that the rest are a majority of white males.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Not
So
even just white people, white males.
yeah.
Not even like yeah. That really is sobering.
So and I think when it comes to like doctors, I don't know the percentage of doctors, but it's somewhere around the same as well. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's it's a small percentage,
Right. The one
But I mean, when you get into like law school, you don't just like go straight into law school. You don't just like one of
show
these
up.
days you want to go. Yeah, you don't show up. You got to get your undergrad. You got to get your bachelor's, and
Mhm.
then eventually you got to get your law degree. So
Right.
you got to go through some steps. You got to go through some barriers to
No
actually get
question.
to law school.
No question. Now, I was going to say the one statistic I do know offhand, having been a former teacher myself, is that when you talk about the teaching profession, around 2% of the teaching profession are Black men. Like so, if you had that same room, there's 100 teachers instead of 100 lawyers. Two brothers in there. Like that's it. Like that's that is entirely it. So you just think about and then particularly with think about law and with education, think about how um
The school to
disproportionately
prison pipeline.
the school to prison pipeline, like how disproportionately those professions affect like Black and Latino people, right? Like whether you're talking about the school to prison pipeline or just talking about mass incarceration en masse, you know?
No, and I also think that's relevant because um, when it comes to the school to prison pipeline, and with you saying that there's only two brothers that are black. Like I do truly believe in that that theory where when you have a teacher that's the same color as you, or the same complexion as you,
Hmm.
you are more inclined to like listen. You're more inclined to like really resonate and I guess gain a hold of that information that they're trying to educate you with.
Yeah, yeah.
And so if you're lacking in that as far as that representation,
Mhm.
um, then you might not be getting the best education that you can get.
Yeah,
And so if you're not getting that good education, where are you gonna be leading to?
I'm telling you.
You're gonna be leading to potentially prison. And I'm not
Yeah,
saying that that's the automatic route that you're going to, but
yeah.
when you're a young kid, um, who is just getting in trouble in the
Right.
classroom, talking back to the teacher. I've had plenty of those kids, in my classroom,
Hmm.
having to call the parents.
Hmm.
They're just used to it. They're like, oh, just another day that I'm getting in trouble. But like they start getting used to it. They start trying to push boundaries
Right.
and push more boundaries,
Right.
and then eventually, they find themselves in prison, and they ask themselves like, kind of why. But at the same time, it's personal accountability, but it's also accountability of the schools and also the the structure of society.
Right. Because I think it's really important for us to understand, like, absolutely, there's personal accountability. Like, you have to have this sort of intrinsic motivation to want to better yourself, but we also think about the ways in which systems are designed, right? And so, if it's designed in a way that's intentional about allowing these young black boys to sort of drift into that mass incarceration pipeline, that's not something that's just like, oh man, the system is malfunctioning. It's really about interrogating the ways in which the system was designed to make sure that happens. And I think about it in two ways. One, when I see adults like in their 40s and 50s who it just seems like never nothing ever really broke their way. Yes, you can look at the choices they made. Of course, they have agency, but there's also a sense of where along the way did the adults in their lives when they were children fail them? Because we know that there are plenty of, just localizing just to men, there are plenty of white men who make terrible decisions, who don't have to face the same ramifications as those same black men that we're speaking about. So what was the
Right.
safety net for them, and why wasn't that same safety net afforded to these black men? You know what I mean?
No, and I also do believe like in mentorship,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I feel like when it comes to like black and Latinos, like there's a lack of mentors, and especially mentors that are like representative of those communities. You
Mhm.
know what I'm saying? Like I remember like me going to this. It was like a church class, and it was
Yeah.
like pertaining to just children who were just trying to learn about God and so on and so forth.
Right, right.
And they were a majority of like Latino, um, and they had never met a law student.
Right.
And I was like, wow, it kind of made me feel sad because like, man, like I met like maybe a lawyer when I was like in high school,
Uh-huh.
but that was pertaining to like, professionalism. I,
Right.
I I didn't need a lawyer to get me out. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, yeah.
But for them, like, they never really knew a lawyer. They never really knew anybody like in grad school. They really didn't even know what grad school was.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, like I was lucky to know what grad school was when I was in middle school.
For sure.
Like somebody explained it down, like explained like the whole process and everything. But for them, they're like same age, middle school, and they didn't even know what grad school was. And I was like,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. And just thinking about how that's one of those sort of perhaps unintended consequences of Brown v. Board, the fact that like pre integration, you're just looking at the black community for a second. Like your lawyer and your doctor lived in the same community as people who were blue collar, as people who had no collar, right? And so you had folks who you could see and say like, "Oh, I can be an engineer. I can be this and that." Now, granted, it didn't extend outside of that community because of Jim Crow. It didn't extend outside that community because of white supremacy. But there was a sense of I can be this person. Versus now, with what has happened with the stratification of class in the picture, you have people who are saying, to your point, I've never seen a lawyer that looks like me. I've never seen a doctor that looks like me. Like all of these things are really tragic to me because it's not as if there aren't black doctors, there aren't black lawyers, there aren't Latino lawyers or doctors, but they're not in the same communities as often. Maybe they
Right.
go to the same church or something. Maybe they're in the same sort of like, maybe that's my cousin or something like that, but we're not really doing life together in a way that can create the effect you're talking about, being inspired by it. Like I think about with my own children, what it means for them to meet my friends, colleagues, family members who are doing things that are upwardly mobile in life, so that the first time they're in these spaces, whether it's applying for college or applying for a job, they're not overwhelmed by like, man, I've never seen anything like this before. Because we got to make it normal for the kids, and that's why, to your point, Joseph, mentorship is critical. You know what I mean?
Right. No, yeah, and that's interesting that you say that, because when I see some of these like really, fancy dollar lawyers, uh, like they're all suited up,
Uh-huh.
they got all the bling, Chris,
Right, right, right.
and I'm just like, man, like you're black, you're Latino, and which is like great. Like I'm happy to see my people,
No
be
question. Be
successful,
excellent. Right.
but I feel like they also have have an embarrassment. They have an
Get you.
embarrassment to their identity.
Get you.
And
Get you.
I
Get
feel
you.
like, I mean, I say this now, but I don't know what's going to happen in 5-10 years from now. But I tell myself like, man, I don't want to be like that.
Got
I don't want to be afraid of being able to go to a community event,
you. Hmm.
where I'm with the actual community. I'm with the people
Right.
who are less fortunate.
Right.
Just because I'm a lawyer, that doesn't make me any better. That doesn't make
Hmm.
me of higher status.
Get you.
But I'm just the same as everybody else.
Get
You
you.
know,
Get you. You're not trying to switch it up on them.
no.
Not
And
at all.
honestly, I think that's probably why I'd want to do criminal defense.
Hmm.
Because I mean, a lot of these clients who are coming to a criminal lawyer. I mean, they don't have a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't.
Get you.
I mean, we do get people who are affluent when it comes to like DWIs and
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
forth, but you still have your people who are less fortunate, and they don't come from a lot, and they're needing help.
Right. Of course. Of course. So outside of your work and your pursuit of this goal, like how do you find yourself spending your time? Like what is something that you do to sort of like outside of the work?
Well, I love to run.
Uh-huh.
Is that what you're trying to get at,
Yeah,
as
that
far as
works.
like
That
so that
works.
I can keep my sanity?
Yeah, of course. Right.
Yeah, I love to run. When it comes to like running, I probably run about 2-3 times out of the week,
Okay.
and probably about like 3 to 4 miles
Hmm.
per run. Um, and then also um, just like going hiking,
Yeah.
just like getting out to nature. Just enjoying what God created.
Right.
You know,
Right. No, for real.
just appreciating the peace. You know,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's just a lot of noise. When it comes to like school and work. You just kind of had to get away.
That's the truth. That's the
Yeah.
truth. Yeah, and there's something about going. I'm not like an avid hiker. I don't want to like front like I do that all the time. I think most of my hiking actually was on school trips as a chaperone, to be honest with you. But I have appreciated every single time I've gone on a hike and like been surprised by how much I appreciate it. Because to your point, there is something about being in the midst of all that creation that really does ground you. Like really, for us who have that God consciousness, it really becomes like an act of worship to even just go on a hike. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, and not to keep going back to the law, but I read my lawyer prayer
Come
almost
on.
every day. I sometimes I forget,
Yeah.
but there's this lawyer prayer that I read,
Mhm.
and it basically talks about how you're trying to do the best when it comes to like analysis, when it comes to confidences that
Right.
a client is giving you, and at the end of the day, you don't want to lose your mind when you're doing this type of work, because when you're practicing law, you're trying to serve the best interests of your clients as much as you can, but even though that those are their interests, doesn't mean that it's your interest.
Right.
So
Right.
it could be a little psychologically confusing for
No
you,
doubt.
because you're like, this isn't what I'm really advocating for myself. I'm
Get you.
advocating for my client, you know?
Right, right, right.
So, especially when it comes to criminal, you know, like,
Mhm.
just because you're defending a criminal doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with everything, you
Right,
know?
right. You're just trying to show the
Yeah.
reality of what
Yeah. Yeah.
happened or didn't happen. I get you. I get you. What was a time in your life that you felt this deep sense of gratitude or awe? Like, what was something that happened in your life? You're like, man, like I just feel really grateful right now.
Um, to be honest to you, when I was working for a federal judge,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I know I feel like I'm talking too much about school and work, but
that's
man,
your
like that's
world right now. I mean,
bro,
you got to look.
that's my life right now.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I just felt like, man, like I'm so lucky,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like I was like, and on top of that, it's not just any federal judge. Like this is a federal judge that is showing me like a lot of diversity in cases in the legal field,
Come
you
on,
know.
giving you great
Um,
experience.
yeah, and I just felt like I felt so grateful, you know. And I had met another judge in that same city, who was, you know, very similar to my background, you know, very similar to my culture. And I was like, man, like I'm so lucky to be able to like meet a judge that's so similar to me, because
Right.
I'm able to learn more from him, and I'm able to learn, you know, learn and listen rather than like just be there and be like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
not really pay attention as much.
You get you.
And I just felt like I felt so lucky. I
Yeah.
felt like, man, this is the best opportunity ever, you know?
Right. Like you realized it was like a serious thing. It's a precious thing you had.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get you. I get you. Absolutely, man. No, I think the like to me, you talking about it through the lens of like your profession. All that reminds me, Joseph, is that I often teach about how your occupation has these wonderful opportunities to line up with your vocation. Like you can hold a whole bunch of different jobs, but there's a certain calling on your life that's going to be like a thread that goes through all of it. So I think that moment of you feeling this deep sense of like, man, I feel so lucky and grateful was really just that moment of like, wow, I was really made to do this exact thing that I'm doing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
No, yeah, and I mean, like for example, I've heard of cases where, you know, people have been you know, put in jail for things that, you know, they've been innocent of, you
Of
know?
course.
And, you know, that's a real thing, you
Mhm.
know? I don't know if, I mean, I'm trying to think of a case that's more popularized. I don't know if anybody in the podcast has seen like Just Mercy,
Oh my
you know?
gosh. Yeah, Brian Stevenson's work, right.
Yeah, Brian Stevenson's work. And I mean, if you've seen the movie, like this man, he goes to jail for something that he didn't even do,
Come
you know,
on.
and he's in prison for that time, and you're just like, man, you have a record, you know, even if you do get out, you're gonna have trouble finding a job,
Come on.
you know, because you know you're a convicted felon, and on top of that, you know, you might even be on death row where you actually
Right.
might be losing your life, you
Exactly.
know, and I think, you know, going back to that point of like feeling gratitude, I was like, man, like I'm so lucky that, you know, I could have been that guy. You know, I could
No
have been that
question.
guy who was in shackles, and I just saw him right there in front of me.
Mhm.
And, you know, I'm sitting in the exact same courtroom, and me and him could literally just swap places,
Right.
you know?
Easily.
And what I get to do, I get to go into the back in the chambers and go talk to the judge about the case.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But this guy, he's going straight to the penitentiary,
Right.
you know? And then it's like, man, like, and I would also think like, man, I get to go home, you
You
know,
get to go
like,
home.
you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
it really like, that's when I felt in awe. I felt like, man, like that could have been me. And
Yeah.
it really, it's true. You know, you never know. Like you get pulled over, you know, you're sitting with a wrong buddy in the car.
Mhm.
You got stuff in the trunk.
Mhm.
Um, you're going to jail for a long time,
Yeah.
you know, just because you're in the same car, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And you just lose your life on like 10 minutes. You know,
Right.
I've seen a lot of body cam footage. Um, I think I'm up to like maybe 20 cases right now.
Okay.
Um, and I've been like estimating the time about like when they stop the car
Right.
to when they actually get arrested. And you know what the average time, at least from my experience from these cases, you
Uh-huh.
know what the average time that an officer stops you from the point that he actually stops you to the point that he actually arrests you.
How long is it?
So it's probably about 25 to 30 minutes until you get into the back of his cop car.
Come on.
And I'm like, dude, and I count it like as soon as he walks to your door,
Right.
20 minutes later to 30 minutes later, you're put in the back of the car. And
Right.
I'm just like, damn, it takes that long just for
Yeah.
the officer to be, asking you questions. Oh, where are you going, sir? What are you doing here tonight? Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Who are you with?
Mhm.
When it's just like all of that is not necessary. Again, this is not like legal advice,
No, not
right?
legal
But
advice. Not legal
like,
advice.
it's not necessary to be able to. It's not. You don't have to necessarily talk to an officer all the time.
Right.
That's the whole point of them being able to have a conversation with you, is to like elicit incriminating statements
Right.
about what you're doing, where you're going, just trying to build a case against you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
I hear that.
but
No, I'm just astounded at it, man, because it's really, as I'm hearing that, I'm thinking about that's not everyone's experience. Like there are people who I've seen people just straight up cuss out officers and still get to go home, right? And I'm like, how does that work? I don't want that skill. I don't want that superpower if that's what it is. But it's just like astounds me that there are people who are able to cuss out police officers and still make it home, and then there are folks who, to your point, are just in the wrong car with the wrong person at the wrong time, and their whole life has changed forever. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Yeah.
and actually, and that's something that I had wanted to bring up when it comes to stops from a police officer. So I'm originally from Austin,
Mm-hmm.
and they have recently moved like state troopers into Austin to like help out with like the criminal cases, as far as like stopping people.
Right.
And I'm gonna try and look up the statistic, but they've been like pulling over more Hispanics and blacks since March. So
Mm-hmm.
I think the state troopers, moved in around March,
Got you.
and ever since then, all the way to like June,
It's been a
they
spike.
noticed that there's been a spike with the minorities that have been pulled over,
Got you.
and some cases it's been really just unjustified.
Right.
So here, let me see. Um, yeah, so it says the Texas state troopers, and this is on the Texas Tribune.
Mm-hmm.
So Texas state troopers are routinely stopping motorists of color in Austin. So more than 8 in 10 people are charged by state troopers since they began helping Austin police, and have been people of color. Yeah,
Wow.
and in the majority, I think it's been in East Austin, and East Austin, it's been gentrified, but there's still a lot of minorities over there.
Get you.
So
Get you.
it's still like a valid reality nowadays. Like
Right.
people say like, oh, like, nah, that's back in the 90s, back in the 80s. Like,
That's
no,
fresh.
like that's happening today.
Of
Like
course.
just because you're brown, just because you're black, I mean, you can get pulled over. Racial profiling.
No question. No question. So let me ask you this, man. Like when you think about your journey, now being a 3L, I don't know if classes have started yet, so if the school year's begun yet, but as you think about like, wow, like I'm almost here. I'm at this stage of something I've toiled, I've dreamed about. It's really about to happen. I'm so close. Where would you like to be in 10 years? Like, what is your hope? Like, I want to be here in 10 years.
Man, I really do hope I can look back at this recording and actually, see it come into fruition.
No doubt.
Um, Honestly, I'd want to be. So I'd be what? I probably want to be a Texas senator.
That's real.
Yeah, yeah. Like, and what I mean by like Texas senator is not like the United States
I get you like
senator.
state senate.
Yeah, it's for
Yeah,
the state senate.
yeah.
So I probably want to practice for a good like 5-6 years,
Hmm.
and then get into politics.
I got you.
But yeah, I could really see myself doing that.
I could see it too. Like I was gonna be surprised if you said anything else. I can see it too, for sure, man, for sure.
Yeah, the actually the the guy that I really want to take his place. He's an older gentleman.
Okay.
His name is Senator Royce West.
Uh-huh.
Um, he's all for the community, man. Like he's a good
There
lawyer.
we go.
You know, I have a lot of good things to say about him. I met
There we
him
go.
like 2 times, 3 times. But I would love to like take his position one of these
Get you.
days.
Get
You
you.
know.
That's real. That's real. Man, hey, listen, 2033, come back and listen to this. Like, you know what? I told it first on baddestchaplain.com. You know what I mean? Like,
We'll see, man. I mean, if the people want me in office, great. If they don't, I'll just still be practicing or be doing
right.
something to try and help people out. You know.
Imagine that. Just letting democracy run its course. I mean, it's a novel idea. It's
Yeah, but the only difficult part is that there is a lot of like there's a lot of Republicans like and huge conservatives here in
for
Texas.
sure. Right.
But I mean, who knows what that'll look like in 10 years? You know
That's
what I'm
what
saying?
I'm saying. The way
We
demographics
never
are
know.
shifting, we don't know.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's going to take a whole lot of gerrymandering. I do know there's an active desire to sort of like turn this into another apartheid thing where you have, a little bit of people having a whole lot of power. But I do think that the demographics in places like Texas are going to be drastically different a decade from now. That's my estimation, at least.
How is it where you're at? Is it majority like
Well, yeah, I think
Democratic?
yeah, so. I'm in Virginia now, and yeah, it's interesting because Virginia about 15 years ago was one of like the first like when people said like, oh, that's a purple state. And then it was like consistently blue, and then they elected Governor Youngkin as governor, who's a conservative, and so it's kind of like But then at the same time, he hasn't been able to live into all the things he wanted to do because our state senate is Democratic. I don't think it's a large margin, but it is Democratic. So I think it's reflective of a lot of states. I often say, Joseph, that um, there's a lot of states, frankly speaking, that aren't red states as much as they're voter suppression states.
Hmm.
So thankfully, Virginia has been able to avoid massive amounts of voter suppression. Absolutely is still here, but thinking about states all throughout the South that seem red on paper but are really just voter suppressed states.
Right. Right. And I guess I'll bring up that one case. I haven't looked into it too much, but I think it's Allen versus Milligan,
Hmm.
where this was also another Supreme Court case that had happened that was made a decision over the summer.
Right, they were busy this summer,
Uh,
man.
yeah, and basically, Alabama's map, their congressional map,
Right,
had violated the Voting Act.
right.
So they basically diluted the influence of Black voters,
Hmm.
who make up, I think half, no, not half, maybe a third or a quarter of
Sizable.
the state's population.
Right.
So it's just like, man, like you're taking out all these votes, but at the same time, like that's not really fair. Like,
Mm-mm.
it's just like, and I mean, at the same time, not enough of us are actually going to the polls. Not enough Latinos, not enough Blacks are going to the polls in the first place. And on top of that, you're going to redistrict,
Hmm.
the map to where we're actually suppressing the voters to go to the polls.
Right, right.
But
But I'll say this, like with the not going to the polls, like yeah, no doubt that there is a particular apathy in there, but I think it's once again very important to contextualize it all. When you have things like mass incarceration that takes away the right to vote in many states, when you have people who do not see the benefit of voting because their neighborhoods are under resourced, the schools are underfunded. There's nothing tangible to them to say like, "Oh, I need to go out and make sure that I vote because that person represents my interests." I think there's absolutely a need for people to have that sense of like, I need to participate in democracy, but there's also a need for those who are in power to make it very clear. Number one, the benefits that they receive, and then live into those benefits, and then thirdly, just really being honest and self-aware as those who are in authority to say, how have we so disenfranchised these people so that even if they do have the right to vote, it feels like their vote is of no consequence? I think these are important, frankly, soul searching conversations that those in government have to have if we're truly going to have a democratic republic.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And another thing that I was going to say was when it comes to like voting, some of us, don't even have voting rights.
Right.
Um, and I'm just like, man, like you live here, you pay taxes, like you get a lot of the benefits of being here in the US,
Hmm.
but you don't have the status to be able to vote, and I think that's just kind of sad because, you're benefiting, but you're not benefiting in a way that's beneficial to society.
Yeah. Totally. Totally.
Because I mean, there are a lot of like immigrants, who, I do believe that, they should have a right to vote,
Hmm.
because I mean, if you're paying taxes,
Right.
you're contributing to society here. Like, why not have the opportunity to vote?
Exactly. Exactly. Now, these are important questions to ask, and I think you're in a wonderful place, truly a frontline state when it comes to figuring out issues like immigration, figuring out voters' rights. I think you're on the ground level for sure.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so, so, so talk to me about this. I often ask this question to our guests here. I want you to imagine that you're hosting a dinner. You can invite 4 guests. They can be dead or living, fictional or real people. Joseph, who are you bringing to this dinner?
Oh man, that's good. That's a good question. Um, John Lewis.
Okay.
John Lewis. God bless his soul.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like there was this quote that somebody had said, "Man, if Abraham Lincoln had a Twitter, like he'd be blowing it up." I just want to have like him at my table,
Yeah,
and like him quote some like badass shit. You
yeah.
know,
Hear you, hear you.
um, and I'm trying to think who else. JFK.
Okay.
Yeah, JFK, and Robert Kennedy.
Oh, wow. So both
Yeah,
Kennedy
yeah,
brothers. Okay.
yeah. I would love to have both of them there.
I hear that.
And then I'll just give you one more. I'm trying to think of another one. Um, I'd probably say Jay Z.
Interesting mix.
Yeah. Jay Z.
Interesting mix. You you threw a curveball at us with Jay-Z at the table. All right.
I will remember. I don't remember the case, and man, like there's so many cases to like just keep up with.
Yeah.
But what really stood out to me was I think it was during the pandemic. I think it was during the pandemic where Jay Z kind of like he like called a governor
Right, right. He's good
for
for that.
like a really publicized issue, and I think it might have been George Floyd. It might have been George Floyd, but I don't remember um, what the issue was for.
Uh-huh.
But he had called a governor, and he was just trying to influence him and talk to him about fighting for social justice
Yeah, yeah.
in that particular situation. And I just thought, man, like for you to like call up a governor and for you to be a celebrity, knowing very well that like you know y- you're not really supposed to be political as a celebrity. I mean, you could,
Yeah, you can.
but
Give him more space.
it's just like I feel like he was willing to help out, somebody else and lift them up.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
just I really appreciated that about him. And I mean, I love his songs too. I mean,
I hear you.
why
I hear
not?
you.
Why not?
You just want to hit him raps. You tried to hit us with the whole. I just love all his
And
community work.
I love his business ideas.
Yeah.
He's a great entrepreneur.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind,
I hear
having
you.
a conversation with him.
this reminds me of the conversation on Twitter many months ago about would you rather have $500,000 or dinner with Jay-Z, and you have chosen the dinner with Jay-Z.
Yeah,
It's fine.
yeah,
It's
I
fine.
probably
It's
would.
great. It's great.
Because honestly, he'd give out like 1 million.
We'll see. We'll see. I mean, the real test of that, right, is like you're at the dinner with Jay-Z, who grabs. I mean, with the people at the table, I feel like it's either Jay-Z or one of the Kennedy brothers should grab that check. You know what I mean? I feel like it's one of those three who needs to grab the check at the end of that meal. You know,
Yeah.
so we'll see. We'll see.
What about you? Who would you have dinner with?
Oh, flip the script on me, man. I think you're the first guest to ask me who I would
Really?
want to have. I think I gotta go back and look at the tape, but this is history here. Um, I would pick Marcus Garvey would be at that table. Um, Fannie Lou Hamer would be at that table. I think I would want Stevie Wonder at that table, and I would put Magic Johnson at that table. That'd be my four. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. Now these are the first four that came to my mind right now. If I do this again tomorrow, maybe it's a different four, but I feel like I have a pretty strong four. I'll stand by my four. Yeah, absolutely, man. So
Yeah, I believe like all the people that I talked about. What I mean, I think that they're just trailblazers, man.
yeah, those
I
are your
mean,
heroes.
like,
Yeah, I get it.
dude, like they've accomplished so much in their lifetime,
Yeah.
and I mean, they still had so much more to go keep going
Sure,
for. You
sure,
know?
sure, sure. I hear that. Definitely, definitely. So, as we get ready to like wrap up the show, like, what is something that you want folks who are listening to this to like keep paying attention to as we get ready to go enter like the fall and the end, I guess the last 3 months, 4 months of this year. Like, what is something that you want people to sort of like keep paying attention to?
Um, I'd probably be mindful of the upcoming candidates for the presidential election.
Hmm.
Um, because we are going to choose a president a year from November.
That's
You
right.
know,
That's right.
and whether if it is President Biden, whether if it is someone from the Republican Party,
Right.
I really do believe that whoever is in administration has so much power, not only within the executive branch, but in other potential branches. Um, and we just have to be mindful about what's going to happen in the next 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I get you.
Um, because I think we've worked a lot towards progress, but we don't want to reverse that progress.
I hear that. I hear that.
And that can also be scary. We don't want someone in office who shouldn't be in office. You know what I'm saying?
That's a real conversation. A lot of talk about term limits after seeing um, Senator Mitch McConnell have another freeze up during a press conference. News about Dianne Feinstein's health and questions around whether or not she's still fit to serve at her age. I think that, and obviously with President Biden and several of the Republican candidates being up in age, so I think it's a real conversation about like how like at what point should people say, what, I've served my country enough. I just gonna step back and let a new generation take the mantle. You know?
And I mean, I would also say like get your voter registration cards. Like some people think like, oh, my vote doesn't matter. Trust me, like it matters. And
Absolutely matters.
you might be talking about the electoral colleges. Like, oh, the electoral colleges are really what matter. But your vote also matters for other politicians. It may not matter for some, because yeah, some of them it may not be the end all be all because of the electoral colleges, but you also have a lot of local politicians who are running for office.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, and I love that you bring up the local election because I often find myself saying to people that don't just get excited to vote every 4 years for president. Figure out who runs your water. who's in charge of the school board, who's in charge of like the things that affect your life on an everyday basis. Like, don't just jump, sensationalize big presidential election. Like, somebody's making decisions about where we need to put speed bump on your street or not. You know what I mean? Like, there's decisions that are going to affect the quality of your life every single day. And we need to pay attention to those things too. Like, the more boring it is, the more likely it is to actually affect your real life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, another thing that I would probably say is, man, if you get selected for jury duty, don't try and like, don't try and curve it. You know,
Don't
like
get out
I've
of it.
seen, no, don't, because man, I see so many people who are selected for juries, and some of them make it, some of them don't. But you could tell some of them, they don't really want to be there, which
Right.
it makes sense.
I
Like,
get it.
you don't want to be there, but man, your vote really does matter. You know,
Yeah.
your representation for a defendant who's on trial really does matter, especially when it comes to criminal cases.
Mhm.
Like, your vote really does matter. I mean, I'm not going to downplay, civil cases, because that's personal injury and
Yeah.
wrongful death and
Right.
things of that nature. But when it comes to criminal cases, like, please do not try and get out of it by some bogus reason.
Get you. Get
Because
you.
yeah, I'm probably saying a little bit too much,
Right.
but
Now you being real though. You being real.
no, but like, I mean, I see a lot of people trying to get out of it, and they shouldn't. They should actually stay on and vote for at least those 2 days that they're going to be on trial.
Get
So
you. Get you. Get you. Well, man, it's been wonderful having you on the show, folks. Keep the name Joseph Ulloa in your memories. Remember, 10 years from now, you might be listening to a future state senator for Texas or something like that. But as always, y'all make sure that you like, subscribe. We're on baddestchaplain.substack.com. Also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Threads is the same thing as Instagram. But yeah, LinkedIn, all that. Yeah. Just there's a lot of exciting things happening. So definitely want to keep you up to date with it all. But until next time, God bless you and keep you. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.
bye.